Hey folks, welcome to Black Gumbo Southern Gardening. Let's have gardening question and answer episode 19. Alright, I got my questions here that I've harvested from the comment section, and many of you have already answered your question, but I want to do this for the benefit of those who are watching. We do these question and answers about, maybe once a month, and if you want your question answered, leave a comment down in the comment section of any video. Yeah, airplanes. Alright, well, I'm sitting out here like a chump in the heat. I got this here heat wave on, and it's across the state of Texas. It's really hot. In fact, they're kind of threatening rolling blackouts, man. I don't know what's up with this Texas power grid, but somebody's head needs to be on the chopping block. Anyway, our first question comes from Holly Zinn, and she asks, what kind of pumpkins do I grow? Well, Holly, I tend to grow Cucurbita moschata varieties. When you buy a pumpkin, like a Seminole pumpkin or a baking pumpkin, a big cheese pumpkin, you want to look on the seed packet and see exactly what the variety is. You've got Cucurbita pepos, you've got Cucurbita maximus, but I want to grow Cucurbita moschatas. And that's like this hybrid here. This is a butternut Seminole hybrid pumpkin. And when I say pumpkin, I mean squash, pumpkin, anything that's a squash, that's a large squash like that. And I grow those because they tend to do well in my area because they resist the vine borers. The way they resist the vine borers is as the vine, you can see these vines spread out, as they grow along the path, where the nodes hit the soil, you can put soil over there and it will root. And what that'll do is if the vine borer hits this plant here, well, it might have rooted here, and down there is going to be a whole nother plant. And so you get a better chance. So I always grow Cucurbita moschata. Last year I grew a Cucurbita moschata called Kogigu, and it gave me about a dozen softball-sized pumpkins that turned nice and orange, and a real nice pumpkin. So anything Cucurbita moschata, like a Seminole pumpkin, like this hybrid butternut, like a butternut or a Kogigu, that's what you want to grow. Back here by my compost bins, I had some volunteer pumpkins come up, and they're kind of viney, kind of bushy, and they've been hit by vine borers here and there. But look what I found the other day. I found a nice little pumpkin down in there. I don't know what that is. I have no clue. Probably some hybrid. But there it is, it's growing. So whatever that is, if it tastes good, I'm going to keep the seeds and we'll grow it again. Our next question comes from Julie Polito. Julie asks, Scott, if you top the sweet potato vine, will it make bigger sweet potatoes? I think maybe this question was spurred by the topping peppers video. I can't remember. All right, right here in this container, I have some sweet potato vines, and they're starting to grow. And you can see that they're pretty long. If I leave these vines to grow, they'll sprawl, and that's the plan. If I cut them, I'm not going to do anything but maybe force out some extra growth on the vine. But the purpose of the leaves and the vines is to spread out and let them go as much as possible, because that's what takes in the sun. That's what photosynthesizes. That's what produces the starches and sugars that it then sends down into the tubers. So in reality, the more vines you have, the more optimal your tubers are going to turn out. If you cut them back, you're going to start reducing the plant's ability to pack all that starch into the tuber underground. And that's what you want with sweet potatoes. Now, when you transplant slips, if you pull out a slip and you've got a big long slip and it's just got a little bit of roots on the bottom, then yes, you would take off part of that because you want the roots to be able to support the foliage. And if you've just got a little bit of roots and a whole bunch of foliage, that vine's going to be compromised. Let me show you the transplants I put in just a few days ago. Okay, all through here are my sweet potato slips, and you can see that I've only left about 4 to 6, maybe 8 leaves on each vine, and I've trimmed off the rest. And they're looking a little stressed because, well, that's transplant shock, but they'll pull through. But you don't want to put a whole bunch of vines in the ground with just a little bit of root on it. You want them to be about that big. And these are going to fill this entire area. And at the end of summer, they'll be pouring over into the sides of my paths here. Yeah, those sweet potatoes will do good for you. Hey, Phoebe, where's the rat? Good dog. All right, our next question comes from Pancogido. I think that's how you say it. I guess if it's not a Hispanic name, it's Pancogido. But yeah, I speak a little Spanish, so I have to say pan cogido. When do you start your tomato seeds for fall tomatoes? Well, I don't really do fall tomatoes. I like the kinds of crops that I can grow in the fall on through the winter that I can't grow here in the summer, like brassicas, you know, cauliflower, cabbages, broccoli, that kind of stuff. I like the winter radishes and the things that I can grow in winter here that I can't grow in the summer. So I don't do tomatoes. But if you did do tomatoes, it's a question of seasonal timing. And here's my seasonal timing for Zone 9A on the Texas coast. This might be different for Zone 9A in your area. Here on the Texas coast in Zone 9A, my seasons are March the 1st, which is our average last frost date. That's when I want to have seeds in the ground or transplants in the ground. If I'm doing transplants, I'll take that March 1st date or whatever your first date, your last frost date is, and count back 6 to 8 weeks. That's when you start your seeds indoors. So I'm starting seeds, especially tomatoes, in mid to late January. Phoebe, you just hit the tripod. Mid to late January is when I start my seeds, and then I aim to have them hardened off and put out in the garden around March 1st. Then my spring garden goes from March 1st through about now, the middle of June, July. These tomatoes here look like they're going to last a little longer, so this bed, I'm going to see how long it goes. But I'll put in my summer crops in mid-June to late June, and those summer crops will take me all the way to October. October is about the time I want to get my fall and winter garden in. So say the first week of October, count back 6 to 8 weeks, and that's when you would start your cabbage seeds, your broccoli seeds, anything that you want to transplant in the garden. So that's my timing. If I was going to do tomatoes, I would start my seeds in late August and get them going indoors where it's nice and temperate, and grow them up to put out in the first week of October. Guess what, Mark Oliver? You've commented so much, you got yourself a question on the Q&A. Mark Oliver asks, what percentage of my garden do I start by seed? Mark, most of my garden I try to start from seed. 80% usually, sometimes 100%, but the reality is sometimes I do videos specifically to show people how to plant starts that they've purchased at the store. And so sometimes I'll go and buy those starts at the store and bring them home and plant them. All my eggplant this year was starts from the store. I'm trying to think of anything else I bought at the store that I planted. My herbs, some of my herbs I bought at the store. But normally, everything in my garden I start from seed, either indoors or directly sown. So all of these tomatoes in this bed were started from seed, and they were started in mid-December of last year. And so they're coming to the end of their season, I think. Some of them, like that one there, giving it up, although I harvested a real nice tomato off of that one today. But yeah, these are all started from seed, and you can see some of them do better than others. This is a black beauty that's giving up. All my black beauties are giving up. But yeah, these edox, these hybrids that I've got, doing just fine. Over here, all the pepper plants are started from seed. At the same time, I started my tomatoes, and they're doing really well. Been harvesting off of these. My ahichara pita pepper, doing great. This is not my single seed challenge, but it's the same type of plant. I actually heard that's the most expensive pepper or chili pepper in the world, 25,000 pounds a kilo. And I guess it's because they're so hard to harvest. There's so many, they're so tiny. But yeah, all these peppers were started from seed, and they're doing well. Technically speaking, sweet potatoes are not started from seed, but all these sweet potatoes were started from slips that I started on what I'd call a seed potato. Malabar spinach, one doing better than the other, not entirely sure why, but yeah, I started these from seed as well. Let's try one. Come on now. Looking good, huh? Summer spinach. Next question comes from Beth Christ. Beth asks, have you ever done cuttings from tomato plants? I saw some comments on a couple of YouTube videos that people had done that. Could you do that with the hybrids? Yes. In fact, if you have a long growing season and you get your tomatoes going soon enough, you can take the suckers, especially, those are helpful. If you got a big old sucker that grows on a tomato plant, snip that out and put it in some potting soil and keep it moist, and it'll grow a whole new plant for you. I normally don't do that because my growing season is actually rather short, because once the heat arrives, my tomatoes stop pollinating. So right about now is the time most of my heirloom tomatoes are giving up. So it doesn't make sense for me to grow another round of tomatoes out of the suckers or out of the clippings from my tomato plants. But you can do it. In fact, this tomato right here, this was one I showed as an example. I took a sucker off of one of my edox tomato plants, and there we go. It's growing in a little bit of soil here, putting on some tomatoes for me. So yes, it can be done. This is a way to propagate hybrid tomatoes. If you take cuttings from a hybrid tomato, you'll get the true type. You will get the same kind of tomato that your hybrid is. As opposed to if you save the seeds from hybrid tomatoes, you won't necessarily get the same kind of variety that the seeds came from. You might, but most often or not, those plants are going to give you tomatoes, but it's going to regress back to one of the varieties of the parent tomatoes that made up that hybrid. That's usually the way it goes, but not always. It can be fun to try, but if you want to get some more plants of a hybrid tomato, then yes, propagate by cuttings. All you have to do is take a sucker, put it in some potting soil, keep it well watered, and it will give you a whole new plant, just like this one. Let's say you have a hybrid tomato plant like this edox tomato. I am looking for a large sucker. Now what I'm looking for is the main vine. It's going to be hard to see because this hasn't been pruned yet in the past couple of weeks, but I have a main vine. I have leafing branches, which are these. They come out kind of straight out of the plant. And then in the crotch of that leafing branch in your main vine, you have these suckers. If I trim that out, what I have here now is essentially a whole new plant. You can see it's even flowering. If I cut that leaf off, I'd even cut this one off, and I plant it in the ground all the way up to there, this will grow into a whole new plant. So that's how you can propagate these things and make a clone of your hybrid plant. Okay, next question. Doing it from inside because got to take a break. Work in Progress asks, so does having different varieties of tomato in one area cancel out your ability to save seeds? And also, Matthew McKillop asked a similar question. What are the chances that the ones from your garden will come true to type since you're growing so many multiple kinds together? Couldn't they cross-pollinate? Well, the answer is they can cross-pollinate. But with tomatoes, one variety is going to be planted next to another variety in my garden, and these two varieties generally don't cross-pollinate. The reason for that is that tomato flowers, tomato blossoms, are generally self-pollinating. Now, if a bee did come from one flower and went to the other flower, yes, that could cross-pollinate, but generally you'll find that all of your tomatoes come true to type. Now, here's the issue with when you're talking about cross-pollination. It's almost never an issue when you just plant your garden, you harvest your tomatoes, and you planted your big beef right next to your black beauties. Well, you're going to get big beefs and black beauties. The time you'll discover cross-pollination is if you save seeds and plant those seeds next year. Then you'll discover whether or not you got some cross-pollination. But generally, tomatoes just planted in your garden, they're going to self-pollinate. Once a tomato blossom pollinates, that's it. It doesn't matter what other pollen gets on that flower. It's pollinated. It's going to produce fruit. It's fertilized. It doesn't need any more pollen. And so that's usually how tomato plants go. However, if I wanted to grow this tomato pure, and let's say I was saving the seeds to sell or to give to my friends, then what I would want to do is protect this crop. I'd either want to isolate it by planting it in its own separate place, or what I would do is I would put some sort of cloth over an insect barrier that keeps the insects out of that bed over my tomato plants when they start putting on blossoms. Growers have other ways that they can isolate the blossoms themselves and make sure that no insects come on and cross-pollinate. But for backyard gardeners like me, I generally don't worry about it. Our next question comes from Mason Hamlin. And Mason asks, do you treat blight or do you pull the plant when you're dealing with tomato blight? If so, what do you use? Well, Mason, I usually pull the tomato because, as you can see, this plant is blighted, and it's really too late in the season for me to do anything about it. These plants are going to be given up anyway. Normally, my blight comes at the end of the season when the plants are stressed. Tomato blight is a fungus. If you wanted to treat tomato blight, you could get a fungicide, and they make all kinds of different brands of fungicide specifically for blight. And what you would do is you'd come in and take off all the blighted leaves, get them out of your garden. Don't put them in your compost pile. Either burn them or throw them away. And then spray down your plant with the fungicide according to the instructions. And that can sometimes work to head off that fungal infection and kill it. But for the most part, if I get blight like this plant here, it's too late. It's done, and I'll just pull the plant sooner than later. You don't want blight in your garden, and if these plants stick around too long and the leaves drop down in the soil, that fungal life will stay there and could possibly be a problem year-round. So whenever you have blight, which is when your leaves start turning yellow and they get these little brown crispy edges on them, usually it's a fungal infection called blight. Blight is in the soil, so that's why we trim our plants to keep the leaves from touching the soil, and we mulch around tomato plants to keep the soil from splashing up onto the leaves and transferring those blight spores to the plant. If you keep a clean garden, you have lots of airflow, and you keep your leaves high off the ground, usually you won't have trouble with blight. Now, some people mistake just plants giving up for blight. Let me show you some plants that don't have blight, but they're done too. All right, so this plant has blight. You can see the yellow on the leaves and the spotting like that. That is blight. But over here, check out my black beauties. That's not necessarily blight. These plants are just heat stressed, and you can see they're just dying off from the heat. This is what happened to my black beauties last year. They're the first to go. These are actually a development out of a Russian strain of tomato, and they just don't handle the heat so well. Our next question comes from Low Country Gardener. I know it's a long ways off, but are you going to try and overwinter your single seed challenge pepper? Yes, this is my single seed challenge. This is an ají charapita pepper, and it is starting to get really, really healthy. It's a lot smaller than the one I've got in the ground, but because this one's in a pot, if it freezes, I can put it in the house, or I can take it in the garage. Yeah, I like this little pepper. It's super hot. Not like a super hot, like a scorpion or a ghost pepper, but it's hotter than I like them, but it has a good flavor. So I'm going to try to keep these, dry them, and grind them into a powder. But yeah, wow, there's my single seed challenge. Doing quite well, actually, and I've harvested a few of the peppers off of there, the little chilies, and like I said, whew, they're hot. Our next question comes from Mansour Mohammed Shafiq, and Mansour asks, when the leaves of my cucumbers start drooping, can I move them into the shade? They're in containers. You can do that. It's not really necessary. You can see these squash plants behind me. They're just like cucumbers. When the sun's beating down on them and it's super hot, they wilt like that, and they look like they're dying, and you might be real tempted to come out and water them real quick. But don't do that. That's the natural defense mechanism of the plant. The plant has stomata on the underside of the leaves. Those are little pores by which the leaves vent gas back and forth. And if they'll close those up and pump all the water back down into the stem and into the roots, because they don't want to lose all that water they have through those stomata. When it's the heat of the day, that's a defense mechanism. Perfectly normal. You don't need to water them. And what you'll notice with your cucumbers or with your squash or with many other kinds of plants that do this is when the direct sunlight is off of them and they've got some shade, they'll perk right back up again, and you'll see your plants are just fine. So you can move them if you want, but if I were you, I'd just leave them there and make sure that if they're in containers, they're getting plenty of water. And even if they do this and they're getting plenty of water, they're fine. The temptation will be to water them, and if you do, you run the risk of overwatering your plants, at which point they'll do the same thing, but they'll die. So don't worry about it. Okay, our final question comes from Swallowtail Nails. And Swallowtail asks, what mulch am I using now? Do I have a good local source? Yeah, I got a great local source. It's my yard. Check this out. This is the mulch that I've been using. This is oak leaves, and there were grass clippings in here to kind of bind it all together. I use this every year. It comes from my oak tree out front. It falls down every spring onto the ground, the leaves do. And when I cut the grass, I get grass clippings and oak leaves together. And this makes, for me, the best mulch I've ever used. It keeps the weeds down. You can see there's a few weeds here and there if you go looking around for them. But for the most part, this suppresses the weeds really well. And the grass composts in place and adds nutrients to my soil. It leaves behind the oak leaves because they don't rot. They take about 3 to 4 years to really break down. So at the end of the season, I can rake all this up and put it back into my bin and then mix it again with grass clippings as I mow my yard. And that makes an excellent mulch. Leaves alone, well, they blow away. Grass clippings alone, they tend to mat down, an impenetrable mat. You can't get through it even with your finger. But grass clippings mixed with oak leaves, best mulch I've ever used. Dried grass clippings. Add this stuff with a bunch of leaves, and you've got some good mulch. This dried grass clippings, when it's nice and fluffy and already dry like that, you can use that, but even though it's dry, it does tend to mat down. But yeah, grass clippings. Harvest your yard. Well, there we go. There's our question and answer, episode 19 in the bag. Man, I really appreciate you folks and all your questions that you put down in the comment section. Thank you so much for being a part of our community. I hope that we've earned your subscription. If you haven't subscribed, I invite you to do that now. And like us on Facebook, like us on Instagram, and we'll talk to you next time. Happy gardening.